morning. I'm Kim Mccleary, President and CEO of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. Thank you all so very much for joining us. And thank you so much for your ongoing support through your contributions by becoming members and by renewing your memberships. We are providing these live streams free of charge as a public service, so we can't do this without your support. Please go to our website at lawac.org to see how you can support us so that we can continue to provide you with quality programming like today's. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's program, Crisis Leadership, The Road to Recovery, with Chris Essel, President and CEO, Southern California Grantmakers, Gregory Scott, President and CEO, Community Action Partnership, OC, Rochelle Bailis, Vice President of Marketing at LeaseLock, and our moderator, Corinne Bendersky, PhD professor, Management and Organizations at UCLA Anderson. For those of you who are joining us online, we will be taking questions in about 20 minutes. There's a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions. Jessica DeGanzik, our Vice President of Events, will be managing your questions during the Q&A portion of today's program, and we'll do our very best to get to as many of your questions as possible. Corinne, thank you so much for moderating today. It's time for me to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you very much to the LA World Affairs Council for this opportunity to moderate this really fascinating panel. We are facing unbelievable, tremendous uncertainty about the future as our organizations and communities confront the long-run impacts of both the pandemic and the extensive social activism demanding that we address systemic racism. Our panelists' organizations engage with communities in supporting them in innovative ways that are really relevant not only to the current crisis, but also to broad societal inequities. I'm hoping that in our conversation today, we'll have an opportunity to learn from them how their strategies and business models may help chart the journey ahead for other types of organizations as state economies reopen and communities engage in important conversation about racism, diversity, and inclusion. The way I'm going to moderate this panel is I'm basically going to ask all three of our panelists to answer the same set of questions so that we can learn from each of their different businesses how they have pivoted in their organizational priorities and strategies and operations to meet the current crises, and then what they think the rest of us and who may operate and work in other types of organizations can learn from their approach. So Chris, if I could start with you, could you share a little bit more about the Southern California Grantmakers organization, which has some really interesting approaches, I think, in particular to public-private collaborations and coordination among multiple philanthropic organizations. If you could tell us a little bit about your organization and in particular, what you've been doing in response to the current crises, we appreciate it. Chris, you're still muted, please.
It was help. Yes.
There you go.
So it's really nice to be on this panel with you, Gregory and Rochelle, and thank you, Professor Bendersky, for moderating us. SCG is a regional association of grantmakers. That is a membership association that consists of individual and family philanthropists, traditional foundations, corporate members, and we have government grant makers in our mix as well. The foundations in general give out about $4.4 billion in LA County each year. So our job as an organization is to mobilize philanthropy to learn and also take bold actions. We work to help them be at the cutting edge of the issues that they're trying to tackle. We help them collaborate and connect with others and help them leverage their resources. In particular towards a helping hand for those in need, but also working towards systems change is sort of the scope of our work product. With the onset of COVID-19, of course, everything had to pivot. We do about 150 programs a year. It'll be more this year since we've gone virtual. So we all are working from home. We are doing several webinars a week on different topic areas, and the focus shifted from sort of the traditional way in which we would handle these topic areas to putting that COVID-19 lens onto the work. Our members really needed as much direction as we could help provide them, and from experts in the field as to where their dollars could be best spent. What was quite interesting, I think, about the crisis is after the first few weeks, it became really apparent that people of color and vulnerable populations were going to suffer disproportionately. LA Times just did a story about how Black and Latinx folks are twice as likely to die if they contract the virus than others, than white folks in particular. Crisis exposed the structural inequities that underlie life in Los Angeles. Why else would it explain that? Blacks are 9% of our population, but 38% of our homeless population. I think beyond that, it also exposed America's systemic racism, along with the institutions and policies that oppress and exclude and marginalize people of color. Then you add the overlay more recently of the horrific murder of George Floyd and the overwhelming response to it. And it was crystal clear to us as an organization that we had even more reason to prioritize a racial justice or anti-racist framework in all that we do. Fortunately, we have been on a racial justice journey and have been committed to advancing racial equity. We have done internal trainings, we have dialogues internally, we have dialogues with our members, and it put us in a much better position, I think, to be authentic leaders at this moment in time.
Thank you for sharing that. Gregory, I'm going to turn to you next. Your organization, the Community Action Partnership of Orange County, seems to work right at the nexus of the issues. You obviously have been working to address issues of inequity, particularly around poverty and disadvantage within communities prior to the current crisis. And what's been going on must be amplifying the urgency of your work. Can you share a little bit about how your organization has pivoted in response?
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm certainly excited to be here on this panel this morning. Certainly, Community Action Partnership has a long history of, as you talked about, Corinne, in your introduction, of working with communities dealing with the issue around poverty. And in many respects, Community Action was born out of a crisis because we were born out of the Civil Rights Movement and the war on poverty. And so it's about 1,000 community action partnerships, what we call CAPs, around the country. Our mission, as we talked about, is right in the middle, the nexus of inequality, whether it's economic inequality, social justice, racial inequity. All those issues were right up our alley in many respects. But we still have to pivot. We address immediate needs in terms of the services that we provide. And then we also empower communities in terms of some of our other programs. We run the Orange County Food Bank. We do over 23 million pounds of food every single year for seniors and for those families who are dealing with this issue. But when this issue happened, COVID-19 happened, one thing I've realized is that leadership matters. And if you were like me 6 months ago, I said, there's no way we're shutting down. There's no way that is going to have that much of an impact. But yet it did. And so when it happened, we had to make some really quick decisions. But the only reason we were able to do that is because, and I go back to my phrase of leadership matter. It may sound corny in many respects, but it matters. Because if I was not able to develop some leadership equity within my organization, making some of these decisions when we had to pivot would have been a lot tougher. And so we immediately had to send people home, those who were vulnerable. We began our social distancing while at the same time we had to shut down some of our programs and our family resource centers. But at the same time, food insecurity was still a major issue in the county and in the region. And guess what? Unemployment went from 2% in Orange County to 19% like overnight. So those same individuals who were once volunteering for us were now in line looking for a food box. And so we call those the newly vulnerable that we didn't have to serve. So there was a lot of pivoting and changing and meeting I almost on a daily basis with my team in terms of how we gonna move in this new environment. Then unfortunately, a little over 30 days ago, the death of Mr. George Floyd, for me personally, as an African American male in Orange County, watching this, I wept for several days. But like, who do I call? Where do I put these feelings? Where do I put these emotions? And so when I think about the history of our organization, I think that's the thing, the flagship for us, or the foundation for us that helped us really move in the right direction, is when we think about the history of our organization being born out of social justice, being born out of a poverty movement. I think we as an organization rallied around that. And that's kind of what helped us move in the right direction. So it was a lot of communication, a lot of engagement on all levels. One thing I realized, when you're in a crisis, all the decisions don't happen in a bubble. So you got to make sure your team is fully engaged. And so we communicated a lot with our stakeholders, with our board, all the way around. And in many respects, and then we develop a plan. And so when we develop a plan, the moment we got into phase 1, we knew what to do. When we got into phase 2, we knew exactly what to do. If someone was going to test positive, we knew exactly what to do. So I think all those things prior to the crisis helped us in the crisis. And yet we're still preparing for post-COVID-19, because the need for our services is going to be greater than they are now. So all of that together is helping us really move forward. But certainly the racial scenarios that we're dealing with right now has had a major impact. I'm developing a racial equity group within my organization. I put it out there to our entire staff. I was thinking nobody's going to sign up and be part of this group, and 25 of our staff members signed up. We're having our first meeting next week, and we're going to try to be a leader in the effort to really look at systematic racism within our organization and certainly within our region moving forward.
That's terrific. I really appreciate you sort of sharing the foundations of the true north for your compass that's really guiding your decision making, enabling you to act quickly and communicate effectively. So thank you for sharing that, Gregory. Rochelle, I'd love to hear from you. If you tell us a little bit about LeaseLock. LeaseLock is interesting in that it's a private organization, whereas Gregory and Chris's organizations are working more in the public and nonprofit space. The high level, my understanding of LeaseLock is that you're working to eliminate security deposits in rental housing markets and lowering the barrier to housing by providing insurance technology that provides security for landlords while also increasing access for tenants. Obviously, with one of the major impacts of COVID-19 in particular, and the loss of jobs, increase in homelessness, and increase in financial and food vulnerability, is that a lot of people are struggling to pay their rents, and homeowners paying their mortgages. And so I understand that LeaseLock has pivoted quite substantially in its practices in response to the current crisis. Please share with us what you've been doing. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. And yes, you are correct. So we are a startup company that operates pretty squarely in sort of the Silicon Beach world of Los Angeles. And part of the reason that I joined this company was I felt really passionate about the product, which was designed in almost an ingenious way to use insurance to solve a major problem, both in the apartment industry and amongst renters around security deposits, which create, an affordability issue for renters moving in, particularly in working class communities, where asking for first month's rent as well as a deposit is quite a financial burden to put on someone. But on top of that, interestingly enough, apartment operators and landlords don't like deposits either. They require a deposit administration costs and liability, and they don't actually do a great job of protecting them in the case of really severe damage or rent loss. So we've spent many years of R&D building a product that eliminates security deposits for renters while also ensuring properties for, our standard plan protects them for over $5,000 of missed rent or damage. And then it eliminates that friction on move out of disputes over a deposit, and it makes it affordable for renters to move in. So I really loved the win-win-win nature of this product, and that we were using technology and insurance and that kind of startup scrappy ingenuity that I am very familiar with as someone who's worked in this industry for many years, but to apply that in an interesting and creative way to solve a societal problem. And that's something that, you know, as we continue talking about this, I think is something definitely on my mind as someone who's worked in startups, technology, and business that I think will continue to be a growing theme in the startup world, the technology community, and the business community overall, especially after a year of such major crisis, both in terms of the pandemic as well as culturally. But I can, just speaking more directly to how the many ways that we've pivoted and adapted over the last few months to meet the needs of the crisis, as well as some of the issues that have come to the forefront in America of systemic racism. LeaseLock in particular, as you know, we've mentioned, we operate pretty squarely in the rental housing market, and that's obviously gone through a very challenging time during the COVID crisis. Much of that challenge has really disproportionately affected working class communities as well as communities of color. And as a member of that community, we spent a lot of time putting our heads together, figuring out the different ways that we could really contribute in our own way as a small company, you know, with our own small access to things that, and perhaps a small budget, but other ways that we can contribute to providing clarity during this crisis and a period of uncertainty. One way that we did that was really using our platform with apartment managers and operators, major sort of enterprise level property management companies who manage, let's say, 100,000 properties across the country. Using that platform we have with those clients to drive donations to a nonprofit organization called the Resident Relief Foundation, which went directly to paying and covering rent for residents who were unable to make ends meet, especially due to COVID-related circumstances. I think that industry obviously cares about rent assistance and keeping good residents in place, but we wanted to make sure that we leverage that platform to generate more awareness for a really direct way that they could benefit. We donated ourselves as well, but as a startup, I think our platform was more important. And kind of in that vein, we have this really unique access to property management system data across all of our clients, which enables us to see rent payment behavior in a way that most organizations or even individual property management companies couldn't nationwide. And so we actually pivoted, and this is where kind of the marketing team came in. Our marketing, business intelligence, research teams, design teams, we diverted all of those resources to focus almost exclusively on providing clarity to the industry on rent payment behavior. Because that was a big question, not just in our industry. I actually, for the first time, had friends asking me about, you know, the rental housing market and the rent payment behavior, whereas before there was, you know, that definitely felt more like a niche industry that I had entered. But then suddenly the big question across America was, can renters make rent this month? Will they be able to pay rent? How do we get through this together? And we had this really unique access to provide some clarity and during this complete era of uncertainty, thanks to, you know, these unique integrations we had, to be able to conduct this research, do these really in-depth analyses and show both nationwide, on a state level, a city level, across asset classes A, B, and C, which affect different demographics of Americans. Are people paying rent? Are they making partial payments? What does that look like? And that not only provided, you know, some clarity during this era of, you know, ambiguity and uncertainty, but it also helped operators develop payment plans and you know, different programs to figure out how to work with their residents based on actual data and benchmark themselves against other apartment operators. And in our mind, anything that we could do to help illuminate what was actually happening, because those, I can tell you, those couple months right after COVID in the rental housing industry overall, as well as with renters, were total chaos. Like nobody knew what was going to happen. We didn't know if there would be a cliff and no one would be able to pay rent. And so anything that we could do to provide more information about that to help people understand what was actually going on that ended up being probably one of the biggest organizational changes that we make. It required a lot of resources for a really small team, but no question that was 100% what we needed to be doing with our time.
That's great.
And then obviously,
I want to, sorry, just interject because we're so tight on time, but I want to make a connection between what you were just talking about and what Chris's organization does. It's a nice opportunity for there to be a private-public collaboration where you're collecting data from your platform and the behavior of your clients that is really informative for policy and really informative for how to direct philanthropic resources to support that particular problem of rental security and home security. So thank you so much for sharing that. What I'd like to do just for a few more minutes is hear from you, your thoughts about what your approach is to your the particular focus of your organizations and to the aspects of communities that you're supporting. Do you think could provide examples or kind of shine a light on ways in which other types of organizations, and particularly private and for-profit organizations, might think about how they move into whatever the new normal, and I hate the term new normal because I don't know if there is going to be a normal. It's certainly not defined yet. And so I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts about kind of what are some general lessons that you could share about that have enabled your organization to navigate these troubled waters that other organizations might be able to take. Shall we go back to Chris and go back around in the same order? Go ahead. Unmute yourself, please. I know it's so hard to remember.
I've tried to be good and shut it off while others were speaking, and then I forgot. So back initially when I started at SDG, it was an organization that was, let's say, shrinking in size, and yet it had so much potential, which is what attracted me to the job. The ways in which we shifted, I think that has really provided a value for us today, began back 6-7 years ago when we shifted from being staff-driven to engaging with our members and listening to what their needs and wants were, from being a passive program provider to viewing ourselves with an activist lens, like how can we also help be moving the needle, and also donning a leadership hat. Like before, it was really more sort of come to what you like and we'll plod along. But now the world has changed so much that we need to play a leadership role in the sector. And then these problems have become enormous over time. So it became very apparent to us, and I think this is really important for others out in the world to look at really diversifying your workforce so it looks a lot more like the city as a whole. We were 80% white when I started and a staff of about 10 or 11, and now we are 67% staff of color. And it has been so beneficial to have people who have lived experience, who have come from these communities, helping us think through how to address the issues of those communities. And it needs to move beyond diversity to a real racial equity structure, as Gregory was saying, internally within your organization. You have to do the deep dive into what does it mean to have an equitable format for your working, to include your staff in the decision making, to give up some of your power as the CEO and say, what do you all think we should be doing to address these issues? The creativity that I've seen come from the team I have now, it has been astonishing for me and exciting for me to be part of that. I spent 30 years in the entertainment industry as a studio, so that was not a very diverse environment. So I happen to be loving what I'm doing now. One of the other things I'll mention that I think has been useful is that we actually were provided a grant back a few years ago to become more prepared for disasters in general. Of course, we're thinking initially about all the wildfires, but this creating an incident command system and being connected with the same organization up in Northern California, Grantmakers, and San Diego Grantmakers, our allies in the state, and being able to back each other up has worked beautifully when we first moved into this work from home shift to a whole new structure of operations. So I think that's another useful tool. So racial justice training is important, internal dialogues, making sure people have a voice at the table, being trained for what we know. We live in a disaster-prone region. Don't put that off. I think it's been really key to having a healthy organization. We also stress mindfulness and real support for each other, very much like a family. So those things I'll add for now. I might have more, but for now, that's what I'll add.
Well, that's terrific, and it does parallel some of the things that Gregory talked about in his initial comments, the internal dialogue, the focus on really making sure your own organization reflects the values and that your organization stands for internally, and how that enables you to actually enact your mission vis-a-vis the community more effectively. I also want to just highlight something you said right at the beginning that struck me, is that's a lot of this, you had to really reframe how you think about your organization in terms of leadership and social activism. And when you embraced those as part of your mission, that really enabled you to leverage the strengths that maybe were underplayed up until that point. I thought that was really nice. And then I also really liked the point that you made about preparation. Even if you don't know exactly what's coming, being prepared for the unknown and recognizing that we face real risks of crises, and having a plan really does enable us to respond effectively. And Gregory, you mentioned something similar about building up leadership equity, and that enabled you to be an effective decision maker and a fast decision maker, but also an inclusive one, in that you were engaging the other members of your team in the decision-making process, or at least so that they were bought into the choices you were making. Can you share a little bit more about that, and also speak more broadly to lessons that you would hope other organizations can learn?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's trying to find ways where leadership happens when you're not there. And that had to happen before the crisis occurred. And so the more I empowered other leaders to take leadership and to own it, like really own it, that also allowed me to shift the organization. Christine says something that I think is really important, because it is happening within our organization, where we're not moving from being a service organization. We still do that, and I think we do it well, but we're expanding our vision, our mission, to also speak from a social justice lens at the same time, because we know that poverty is right in the middle of racial injustice. We know that housing issues are right in the middle of racial injustice. We know that when it comes to healthcare, and the disparity between some communities versus others is right in the middle of racial injustice. So if we provide service and don't speak to those issues, I think we're missing an opportunity to move the needle and really make change. So I think in this COVID-19 environment, along with this racial injustice environment, there's a reckoning that's happening. And even though it hurts, and it doesn't feel good every day, I'm excited about real change. I think is going to happen as we move forward. So part of that reckoning is supporting Black Lives Matter and other communities of color, and be intentional about it, and really be intentional about it. I think Christine talked about this too, is preparing for the crisis before the crisis happening. I had a mentor in my previous life who served on my board, who really pushed me around risk management. And I'm thinking, I got to raise money. I have to do this. I got to do that. The last thing I'm thinking about right now is, but he really pushed me around that. But that grew me up as a CEO, where now is a big part of our organization. And I think by me at the top of the organization, pushing risk management, pushing being a master around crisis leadership, I think helped us get through this, because we're gonna face another one later at some point. And I think all of that kind of helped. But I'll leave it there, because I know we're running out of time, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And I Gregory, I'm also struck by the word reckoning, and also the implication of we're facing a reckoning is that organizations now really, what that reckoning means is organizations need to recognize and to claim their social justice responsibility. And I think it's a really interesting question and an intriguing question that I'm hearing in this discourse today that I haven't heard so explicitly or so consistently when faced with prior crises around racial injustice, is private organizations also are recognizing that they have a social justice responsibility, at least with respect to their own employees and their own organizational communities, and more than I think I've personally seen before, acknowledging a responsibility in the communities in which they're situated. So it's not just a responsibility faced by organizations like yours that have a mission and grow out of social justice movements, but I think that there's a broader recognition of that in society. And Rochelle, same question to you, if you don't mind. What are some of the lessons that you think other kinds of organizations might learn from your startup company's approach to using technology to address this really deep social problem, and one that is very much rooted in racial and other types of social inequities?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more that I think I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation, not just amongst organizations that are already rooted in social justice and nonprofits, but in for-profit communities like the one that I work in, both organizationally and internally, which we're definitely seeing within our own organizations, some really critical conversations and decisions being made to affect tangible change in terms of elevating more employees of color and hiring much more intentionally than we had before, which I think is particularly important in the tech community, which has a lot of sway over society, but a very disproportionately low amount of representation amongst women as well as people of color. But I just overall, you know, the way our business model is designed is every time that a security deposit is eliminated, it actually benefits us, it benefits the renter, and it benefits our customer. And I truly believe the businesses of the future can't be designed in this one-sided direction that only benefits a single party, for example, your corporate clients or yourself. I think they need to be creatively and even ingeniously designed to really lift up and elevate all of the communities that they affect, both directly and indirectly. And I think that's a huge shift in corporate culture that I don't think is happening next year, but I think the right conversations are happening for that chain reaction to start. And only the product
that articulation of I'm sorry to interrupt you, just you articulated synergies among stakeholders in a way that really resonates for me. If you might just keep it to one more minute, and then we really need to open it up to questions, but I don't want to stop you from finishing your thought.
Yeah, no problem. I was just saying those, I believe that those really are the products that not only will survive you know, both socially and, you know, economically, but those are also the products that survive both a good and a bad economy, because they help people who are struggling and they help when things are good. And that's, at least for us, that's what we found as well. We work well in both, and we're not designed to take advantage of a bad situation or people who are struggling. And so I think that new business model that is really this self-fulfilling feedback loop of positive ripple effects for the company and for their customers and their customers' customers, we can do it. And I think we can build those products. And there's a drive to do that that's growing more so than I've ever seen before. That is exciting to me as someone in the industry that I'm in, on top of all the amazing things that, you know, Chris and Gregory and their organizations are doing. I think the for-profit world needs to join hands in that as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what all of you have shared with us. Jessica, can I turn it over to you to moderate the Q&A?
Definitely. Thank you so much. Chris, this first one is for you. Does Governor Newsom have the right spirit for these multi-level challenges? What has he done right and wrong? How could state government better help your missions?
Well, we are delighted that Governor Newsom's in office. Going back actually to one of the earlier points from Corinne at the onset, is that we have worked hard to bring philanthropy together with government to combine our efforts. Government spends a lot more money on the same issues we care about. What if we strategically work together and leveraged what philanthropy can use as risk capital and try out new things, and how can we help then inform how government can do a better job at trying to tackle the same issues that we're tackling. And Governor Newsom's been an amazing partner to us on this. We probably could not have achieved that in, you know, I've been around politics a long time. In the last 4 or 5 governors, it wasn't really, there wasn't room for that conversation. But his issues and his stands are so aligned with what I know philanthropy's issues and stands are. To that end, we asked for a position within the governor's office, and we got it 6 months into his administration. We now have a senior advisor on social innovation that reports directly to the governor, and she is our liaison and the nonprofits liaison into the administration. So we are working hand in hand on a number of areas, and I'm so glad that sort of structure was in place when COVID-19 struck. I don't have a lot of critiques of the governor other than he's in a really tough spot, and we all are watching as the COVID-19 seems to be coming back into an early second wave, if you want to call it that. They're tough issues. I mean, how do you tackle the affordable housing crisis in this state? How do you tackle something as big as the homelessness crisis is? He needs partners, and I think it's incumbent upon business and philanthropy and other civic organizations to partner with someone who's as open to partnering as he is.
Yeah, there are so many issues right now to try to focus on. I don't envy people trying to tackle all of that. For Gregory, is there any effort being made to enable the public to dialogue with each other about race tensions, as opposed to the usual media approach of just describing the problem?
What a great question. One of the things that I think some efforts are being held. I think we have to do more because unless we create an environment that makes people a little bit more uncomfortable, I'm not sure we'll see real change going forward. And so, I'm reaching out to other leaders in my area of influence to say, hey, we need to have this dialogue at this level and use our influence to gather others so we can have some real conversation that may be uncomfortable, but necessary to bring awareness. How do we pull our resources together? How do we influence public policy going forward? Our voices together matters. How do we do that? I'm a big fan of our governor. I can imagine wearing his shoes right now, because there's a lot of other, outside of a crisis, we were in crisis. We had a homeless crisis, we have a housing crisis, we have an economic crisis, we have a healthcare crisis, and now you put this on top of that. But I think if we don't have that conversation in context of how everything else is happening, I think we lose this moment and we lose an opportunity. So I am now reaching out and having dialogue with certain leaders and say, hey, we need to have this conversation at a much broader level so we can really move the needle and make change. And we also have to remember that this is not a LA problem or Orange County problem or Inland Empire problem. We have a regional problem. Homelessness is a regional problem. Our issues around race are regional problem, and good and bad. And so I think we, as a region, we got to come together and collaborate. I think we have to involve government. We have to involve the private sector in that conversation if we're going to make real change.
Thank you so much. I guess this would be for Chris and for Gregory. How should nonprofits that are structured to include lots of low-paid staff and highly paid management staff approach questions of equity? Should they restructure or reimagine? I don't know, which of you wants to take that one first?
Well, first off, the nonprofit sector is really struggling right now. In a report that came out recently, at least 20% of the nonprofit organizations are likely to go out of business, and that was several months ago. So I know that number is probably at more of a third. So, and many have had to upend their work and search for new resources to handle the response to COVID-19. I think as we come out of this crisis, hopefully sooner than later, that as these organizations rebuild, I think it's really important to start looking at the beginning about how they're structured. And is it a white dominant voice that leads those organizations? Or can we bring in can more people of color be joining these teams? And can there be support? I mean, there's support out there. We have hired consultants. Other folks in philanthropy are hiring consultants to help them facilitate these kinds of dialogues that create a different view, a more transformational view of what can happen if we all work together. Nonprofits shouldn't be expected to work in their silo, neither should government, neither should business. We all need to come together to have some joint initiatives that we want to move the action on.
Yeah,
Gregory, did you wanna
I
add?
would say, yeah,
Go ahead.
I would say, you know, if I was to add anything to that, we're constantly looking at our structure as relates to pay equity, because I think oftentimes when we look at a nonprofit or look at the nonprofit sector, we look at them as some charity on the side, when in reality, the nonprofit sector employs 20% of the workforce across the country. And so we are a major part of the economy as relates to the workforce. And so I think looking at, one, operating as a business, because it is, but looking at pay equity across the board, I think is something we always have to examine. It's not a conversation that happens at conferences when we show up. It's not a conversation we have when we have lunch together, but I think it's a conversation we need to have as it relates to pay equity across the board. Not pay equality, but certainly pay equity. As Christine talked about, whose voices rising to the top, and making sure that there's equity across the board. There's talent out there of people of color, of women, and we just have to take the extra step to find the talent. And then when we find the talent, we have to be bold enough and create the right structure, and that's a process to be able to pay that talent once we find good talent.
Thank you so much. Rochelle, what advice would you give to the for-profits that are saying they want to help affect structural change with respect to racial justice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think in full transparency, we're figuring that out ourselves within our organization now and having those conversations. I definitely think a huge part of it is hiring, especially across any industry, but in the industry that I'm in, as well as in corporate America. I think reframing how we think about the hiring process, how we seek out candidates, how we look at resumes, how we define culture fit, which is a term that I think can be fraught in a lot of ways and restrict the idea of what the right employee looks like within a company. And understanding, you know, how leadership works within an organization, and the power dynamics of having an all-white or all-male leadership group, and how that then affects the ability of others to move up or even be perceived as a potential candidate to move up. I think we're having a lot of those conversations internally at our company right now, but I think it starts with opening up that dialogue and with an actual clear written down intention of a company that makes that part of their mission as an organization, and that they're holding themselves accountable to, setting actual benchmarks of goals that they would like to hit. I can tell you the for-profit industry loves benchmarks, and we actually have to apply those to our specific goals that we'd like to hit, both in terms of hiring and internally and on a cultural level, but also in terms of donations and corporate donations. Our company, like I mentioned, we are so small, it's much more difficult for us to make a dent, but I've also worked for much larger organizations that take their philanthropy arm very seriously, have hires specifically dedicated to that, and making sure that the funds are allocated to the right place. And I think especially when it comes to racial justice and the discrepancy between sharing social media posts and saying that you advocate for this, and then companies putting their money where their mouth is, that's a gap that's going to need to close, and the transparency required for that, as well as the actual tangible plans, I think are going to be a huge part of that. I'm trying to think if there's...
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I can think of for now, but still, I think this will be an ongoing conversation for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important point though. It's like you can talk the talk by posting on social media, but if your company isn't walking the walk, then you don't get that validation or social clout without actually doing something to help the issue.
Right.
Gregory, question for you. Could a much larger AmeriCorps program across the USA help channel Black Lives Matter into more opportunities for service, learning, skills, experiences?
Absolutely. I am a big national service fan. in my prior life, prior to moving to California, I ran a National AmeriCorps program under an organization called Youth Build. And so we had thousands of AmeriCorps members across the country. And I think that voice, because it was a leadership development model, a leadership empowerment model for young people between the age of 16 and 24. And I think their voice as leaders, as up and coming leaders, matters. And so I think having national service and having AmeriCorps at a much higher level can really make a difference as it relates to Black Lives Matter. I think there's a lot of synergy there. And then, service and service learning, all of that empowers those AmeriCorps members as they go on to college, as they go on to whatever their career is going to be. So I'm a big fan of national service. I'm a big fan of AmeriCorps. And I solely think the combination of that with Black Lives Matter can also help move the needle.
Thank you so much. And this is for all of you, so if you just want to take a moment to answer this question. Is there a leadership strategy you rely on to guide your crisis management? Or maybe there's a mentor or a leader that you look up to in trying to deal with these complicated times we're in. Chris, I'll start with you.
I've had mentors in my life, a mentor in particular that I have turned to numerous times. It's really important to go, on your own leadership journey. I had a team or an organization for decades now, and I have not learned more than I have now. I've learned that my assumptions are not right, and I think we all have to question our assumptions. We have to keep learning and listening and understanding and then acting. And be guided by a more inspirational goal that gets you through some of the tough conversations and tough times, something that keeps you excited about the work that you're doing. And in my case, I would say that it's really about, I've always been committed to giving back to my community, but now it's really about creating a more equitable and thriving LA for all, and to use this crisis, the joint crises, the joint public health crises of the racism that's now so clear to all of us, and COVID-19, to say, let's not go back to the way it was. Let's spend all our energies to create a more equitable society at this point in time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that was something I felt I needed to say as a leader.
Thank you so much. Gregory, how about you?
It is a very interesting question. I think, for me, my faith leads me in many respects. And so because my faith leads me, that's normally my compass for how I make decisions, how I move, how I make decisions about my personal life, how I move. But at the same time, I failed a lot. And I've had to have mentors who pull me to the side and give me advice on many occasions. And that's why when we started this conversation, I talked about leadership matters. It's because I was taught that, and because I had to learn from my own mistakes. And so now and it's about also finding your purpose and finding the right spot for you. And for me, community action does that for me. Everything I care about, community action does. Everything that, from homelessness to economic empowerment to racial injustice, like all the things I really care about. So, but it took me to get here. All the other things culminated, youth empowerment, youth leadership development, all those things together got me here. But that had a lot to do with me navigating, finding my purpose. And then when I found my purpose, it really took my leadership to the next level. But I do personal development all the time. I read something every morning. I'm a big John Maxwell fan. And so, and I have my own mentors in my life that I have one mentor. When I'm with him, I got this little notebook. I take out my notebook and I listen. And I sit at his feet and I listen and I ask questions and then I shut up. I ask questions and then I shut up. And that has helped me kind of grow as a leader moving forward. But I always go back to leadership matters. Finding your purpose matters, because as Christine talked about, this is a journey. And sometimes it's not always an easy journey, but it's certainly a journey, because you take on the responsibility and the weight of leadership when you have people who are depending on you all the time. And that's why Mr. George Floyd dying mattered to me, because it mattered to my organization. And when I told them, we had a big Zoom call, we use Microsoft Teams, but I had 100 people on the call. And when I said, I'm not okay, many of my staff members resonated with that. And I got email after email because they read. So being authentic as a leader, I've learned to do that, to say, hey, I'm not okay, and this is why. And the support that I got from my staff and from my team mattered. But if I had not had leadership equity before that, then maybe my statement would not have made any difference. But because I had that equity before, it mattered. I have no idea if I answered the question or not, but that's my take.
Well, no, it sounds like from both of your answers that a big part of leadership is actually having humility. And it sounds like that's what you're both really noting in your answers. So Rochelle, I will turn it over to you as well. What has been your leadership guidance, or which mentors have you looked to in dealing with this?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, to piggyback on that idea of humility, I think during this crisis, this multifold crisis that we've been experiencing over the last few months, I've really returned to this idea of, it's called conscious leadership. So basically constantly checking yourself to see whether you're above the line or below the line. Above the line is a state of being open and curious and sitting in uncertainty, which I think can be difficult for any human being and can be especially difficult for leaders where people are looking to you. And below the line is a state of fear or defensiveness, strictness, rigidity. This is how we've always done it. It's often comes from a variety of factors. We've all been there, and I think most of us fluctuate above and below the line constantly because we're humans. It's part of just our almost evolutionary reaction to feeling threatened. And when it comes to difficult discussions about race, when it comes to dealing with the inequities that have come out of COVID and dealing with just the extreme uncertainty that we all experienced right after COVID hit, constantly checking ourselves, and for me, checking myself to check if I was above the line and if I was feeling uncomfortable, what state that was getting me in emotionally, and whether that was still productive, if I was still being curious and open to conversations that made me uncomfortable, and to things that I didn't understand yet. I think that keeping that mentality of curiosity and openness always serves all of us, not just leaders, and it serves us in our personal relationships too. But I think that's I've always believed in that, but it's never been tried and tested like it has in the last few months. And I think that we will continue to carry the tenets of that through the coming years, no question.
Thank you so much. I will just end on this. It was a question from one of our members at the very top, but she asked, are we trying to recover, or are we trying to redefine our community? And it sounds like there's that silver lining with everything that's going on, is that we can redefine our community. So if you would each like to comment on that, are you trying to recover, or are you trying to redefine our community? And we'll do the same thing. Chris, I'll start with you, and then I'll turn it back over to Corinne.
Recover doesn't inspire me. Yes, we all want to be able to go out and see people and be with people again, but it's much bigger than that. I liked what Gregory said about this being a time of reckoning, and it's a moment that we have to treasure and not go to the thrown behavior of I want to go back to normal. This is all too stressful. This is no, we can't solve society's problems. We can't live in a space where this is not my problem anymore. We are seeing how clearly interconnected we are, and how we depend on and need each other. Even if we've never met or seen somebody, they all impact us here within our community, as it does across the country. So no, it's time to re-envision a new future. The breakdowns are too big that we're trying to tackle right now.
Gregory.
Awesome. I'm glad I'm following Christine in this process because I feel such a connection to a lot of things she's saying. I don't want normal because homelessness was normal, right? Domestic violence was normal. Racism was normal. And I can go down the list of all the injustices that we accepted as being normal. Crimes against women were normal. And so we go down the list of things that were normal prior to COVID-19. During this time period, moving forward, I don't want normal. I want to. I want something that I want a new vision. I want to. I don't want to recover from something that we were doing before. Whatever we do, I want it to be greater than it was before. I want change to happen. I think this is our moment for us to create whatever is going to be before us. And I think post-COVID-19 and post-COVID and the post-George Floyd is going to be more important than where we are right now. How we react to this moment is going to be more important to where we go from here. So normal is, and I've said this to friends of mine, if one more person says, you know, I can't wait till we get back to normal, I'm going to pull my hair out. And as you can see, I don't have any. So it's something that I don't want to, it's not the kind of conversation I want to be in. I want to have the conversation that we are envisioning something new that's going to be really move the needle going forward.
Thank you so much, Corinne. Any closing, or sorry, Rochelle, any closing remarks? Then I'll turn it back over to Corinne.
I think they both said it really well. I definitely think it's a time of redefinition. I will say in rental housing, and also just in terms of COVID as a pandemic and a disease, I think there is recovery to be done that's not being done health-wise in terms of public health. But I totally agree that I think we should be emerging from this with a redefinition rather than a focus on just recovery, because recovering back to what we were before is no longer acceptable. But I think they both said it just as well, so we can probably leave it there.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much, Corinne. I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you. You are such a thoughtful group. It's been just utterly engaging to be listening to your responses to the questions and how profoundly you are and authentically you are responding to them. You know, I think that inertia is a very powerful force in society, and sometimes things really need to be broken, or we really need to reach rock bottom for change to occur. And this does feel like an opportunity for many people, for society as a whole, to redefine, reimagine, reinvent, and change the way that we operate going forward to address some of those really hard, big questions that Gregory identified as normal. I'm going to throw climate change in there because that's something that also has been very much impacted by our stay-at-home orders around the world. We've seen a tremendous short-term reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And what does that suggest to us in terms of behavior changes going forward that may be more sustainable, maybe more equitable, maybe more fair? And I just finished with a note. You know, I've had lots of conversations with Black colleagues and friends, and the theme that has come through that has resonated with me so strong is we are exhausted. We are exhausted of having the same conversations over and over and over again. And we have been waiting for our white allies to show up and to wake up and don't go back to sleep, because it's not just on the Black communities to try to make changes. This is everybody's problem. This is a recognition and an awakening, I think, of embracing social justice as everybody's problem. And along with that recognition are a lot of other potential changes to our practices at our workplaces, within our communities, and within our societies as a whole, that may in fact improve a lot of those sticky, horrible, old normal problems that we took for granted. And we're going to really, I think, have an opportunity to make major impacts on a lot of different dimensions. And I found you guys very inspirational, and I appreciate it. And I want to thank Lisa and everyone here for having us and bringing us together. So if I can turn it over to the closing comments, and thank our panelists so much for your time and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Corinne, you did a great job moderating, and Chris, Gregory, and Rochelle, you were so inspirational and so informative, and this was such a treasure. And our video today will be posted on our YouTube, and you can all have access to it to spread the word and get your great words of wisdom out to all of your colleagues and employees and friends. So thank you so very much. For our viewing audience, please tune in tomorrow for politics in the time of coronavirus. And then on July 2nd, we have opportunities for foreign policy in Assad's new Syria. July 14th, a Bastille Day discussion, and July 20th is climate change, the biggest environmental concern. So Corinne, you were right. That is a key issue. So thank you all, and please go to our website at lawac.org to register for our upcoming programs, make a donation, or become a member. Stay safe, stay informed, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you all so much. That was terrific. Take care.